We write books, essays, messages. We write diaries, journals, to-do lists, grocery lists. We write motivational post-it notes. We write emails whenever sent. We write even when we don't write. When we think, we write. I think, therefore I write. Therefore, what? Why do we write to ourselves? And is it good for us? How can we use it to our advantage? As I mentioned in another video, Virginia Woolf believed in multiple selves. But what's also interesting is how she describes her writing style with regard to those multiple selves in her diary. I got out this diary and read, as one always does read one's own writing, with a kind of guilty intensity. I confess that the rough and random style of it, often so ungrammatical and crying for a word altered, afflicted me somewhat. I'm trying to tell whichever self it is that reads this hereafter that I can write very much better. And now I may add my little compliment to the effect that it has a slapdash and vigor and sometimes hits an unexpected bullseye. It's almost as if writing so sloppily and without inhibitions, you trick your hidden self to come out. So there is a method to this mad and ugly way of writing, which is often how we write when we write to ourselves, with no consequences, no one else to read it. How you write, what you write, when you do not want to write. All of this is a way of communicating with your second self, one which you can never escape, but one which sometimes escapes you. On top of that, aside from knowing your multiple selves, you can lead thousands of lives and embody thousands of selves in your writing. As Susan Sontag wrote, "In the journal, I do not just express myself more openly than I could do to any person. I create myself. The journal is a vehicle for my sense of selfhood. It represents me as emotionally and spiritually independent. Therefore, alas, it does not simply record my actual daily life, but rather, in many cases, offers an alternative to it. If I'm feeling selfish and decadent, my writing may be sharp and angry. If I want to be good-natured and kind, my writing will flow in simple style, hiding any trace of itself. If I want to be crude and tangible, I will repeat words and cut sentences off. If I want to be poetic, I will spend 10 minutes perfecting a phrase. Either way, I will be whoever I want to be, and none of these will be a lie." When you write for yourself, you're not in court. You don't need proof. You don't even need the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The thing about the present moment, and writing in the present moment, is that it doesn't care about the past or the future. You may care, but it doesn't. It presents itself to you as it wants to, as you write, and you respond to it as you do, in the moment. Never completely faithfully. In a way, we're a slave to that moment, until one moment after another liberates us, as we go back to what we had written and cannot believe it. The moment is gone. There is no proof for it. There's only that imperfect written statement. But however truthful or faithful to the moment, to your memory, your writing is, doing it in itself may convince you that your life is interesting. As Joan Didion wrote, "We are brought up in the ethic that others, any others, all others, are by definition more interesting than ourselves. But our notebooks give us away, for however dutifully we record what we see around us, the common denominator of all we see is always, transparently, shamelessly, the implacable I. And when you write the I, you believe in it just that bit more than you did before." And also, in terms of believing in what you write, whether or not it's truthful, whether or not your life is interesting, the thing is, it is a safe space, because you cannot choose all of your circumstances. As much as we work on ourselves and our lives, there will always be things that we cannot fully control. But just like in death, in that textual, intimate space, we're all equal. We have the same imaginative opportunities. And that may not be enough forever, but it can be enough for a moment. I tend to romanticize writing, and I know that. And I don't really mind. But the reality is, I know that there is a trend to recording everything you do these days. How much you sleep, eat, walk, do, accomplish, how many books you've read. In a way, this is natural. With the pace of today's world, it seems like we desperately need to record things before they slip away and we slip forward to the next thing. But doing this is actually not new. In the 19th century, keeping diaries was very fashionable. As I read in an article recently, a commercial diary manufacturer called Let's was offering 55 different types of diary to consumers by 1862, These diaries were designed to provide diarists with more and more spaces for list-making and self-recording, and some of the diaries contained headings such as books read or books to read. So this has been going on for a while. Now, keeping lists is not necessarily the same thing as keeping a diary and writing in full sentences, but it is connected. Sometimes you try to write long paragraphs about your life, but when you come back to it and you want to recall the good old times, it becomes overwhelming. There's this huge, novel-like chunk of text, and your brain may find it hard to decipher the connections, the milestones, the big things, because it's all written in a stream of consciousness. So keeping lists seems like the next best thing, whether they're private or public, like, say, Instagram. Having separate blocks, whether points on a list or pictures, can give a seemingly clearer view of how your life progresses. This kind of thing is almost like hoarding, gathering stuff, experiences, and never throwing any of them away, just in case or because it's painful to let go. On the other hand, we might argue that if we write something down, that is an act of letting go. Because if it is there, written down, then we don't need to keep it in mind constantly, which would have otherwise been hoarded in our minds. But I guess whether we see it as hoarding or as the opposite of it, it still suggests that we're very attached to everything. Stuff, experiences, memories. But of course we need to ask, can we ever get to the bottom of a certain moment through a point on a list or a picture? Do we need to write it out in full sentences so that it is more nuanced and deep? But even if we write every day, can we ever truly grasp it? Or do we write it and leave it behind and it just exists by itself, for itself? Does writing like this have any intrinsic value? In the essay Between Memory and History, Pierre Nora writes, "Fear of a rapid and final disappearance combines with anxiety about the meaning of the present and uncertainty about the future to give even the most humble testimony, the most modest vestige, the potential dignity of the memorable." He also writes, "The quest for memory is the search for one's history. By writing things out, we go on a quest to remember, a quest to exist, a quest to narrativize our existence. What is being remembered? In a sense, it is memory itself. The psychologization of memory has thus given every individual the sense that his or her salvation ultimately depends on the repayment of an impossible debt. When we write about an event, what we really set in stone is not the event itself, but our imperfect memory of it. So what really happened and who we really were does not exist. It turns to dust. All that gets left behind is textualized memory. But because it's impossible to extract pure memory, and because we know it's impossible, we always feel in debt in some way. In debt to ourselves, the moment, the grand history of our lives in the making. But speaking of pure memory, do we really want to remember the exact memory? Or do we want to remember the stories we constructed around it? In science, there are now conversations about extracting our memories and immortalizing them. For example, putting them into an artificial being, so that our pure memory lives on. Our so-called Connectome, which consists of its complete network of neurons and all the connections between them. So essentially, we are our Connectome. And putting aside all the issues around ethics and privacy in terms of who has access to our memories, or who owns them, this also made me wonder, do we actually want to have access to pure memory? After all, writing goes against pure memory. Writing always includes perspective, bias, narrative, hindsight. So I'm not sure how I feel about this really in this context. Pure memory seems intimate, but in an intrusive, almost threatening way at times. And whether we want pure or textual memory, what do we want to remember? Is it worth to remember points, lists, numbers? Is it worth to remember emotions? Is it worth to remember our perspectives on things, our fears, desires, our actions? I guess it depends on the individual, but I will take a wild guess to say that maybe remembering lists and points and numbers might not be our priority. So to circle back to the beginning, our obsessive drive to record things may be toxic sometimes, because it may stem from our fear of passage of time or lost time. But still, if we textualize our past, it almost seems like whatever happened, it was still worth it, because now it takes space, even if it only takes space on our computers or in our notebooks. And I think it's good if we think we deserve to take space, that our lives deserve to take space. but not necessarily at the cost of our space and time right now. Writing as resistance does not need explaining, but how can writing for yourself be a form of resistance? And if not resistance, then at least agency. If we really take the time to write about our lives, what we observe about the world, etc., we take one step closer towards having mind agency over our lives. We let ourselves figure out and articulate what we really think. If we write a lot, we may hide and avoid for a while, but eventually something of our own will spill out. There's no one holding our hand while we write. It's just us. So even when we're writing a summary of a book we read in our own words, there's something of ours in there too, always. And I think another reason why writing for yourself can be useful in terms of maintaining agency or freedom of thought is that there is no pressure. There is no danger, tension, or vulnerability of mutual correspondence. There is no expectation or pressure of published writing. There is no grading process of essay writing. It is only an awakening. It is priceless and one of a kind. The only exchange that can ever take place is between you and yourself. Which means that even if you're unsure of something, even if you don't have an opinion, if you're scared of having an opinion, if you're lost or confused, at least with yourself, you'll be honest. And admitting that you're unsure, lost, that you don't know what you're doing, or where you're going, or what you think, can be really liberating. There's something really valuable in seeing the progression of your life in the form of an internal monologue. It's like reading a novel or a saga about someone's entire life, or a period of one's life. You can analyze yourself through analyzing your writing style, the length of your entries or sentences, when you wrote, the punctuation. Maybe you used a lot of ellipses at one point in time, or a lot of semicolons at another. And what does that mean? Maybe you wrote one-sentence paragraphs sometimes, and those stick out. And you can see the main thoughts and concerns occupying you at the time. Maybe it's a mixture of everything. As I said before, writing uncovers your multiple selves, but also through seeing the progression of it over the months or years, and through looking at it critically, like a literary scholar or a critic. You can see your life and yourself not just through the account of your life you gave, but also through treating your diary, notebook, or whatever like a literary text. At the end of the day, I really like order. I like knowing where I stand. I like knowing where the future is and where the past is, even if I don't necessarily know what they might contain, or even if my vision is blurred or flawed. And I often feel like writing inconsequentially for yourself helps in maintaining some sort of clear, sane order. I talked about trance-like habit once. You can check that video out, and now that I think about it, is there any habit that is more trance-like and yet more conscious and deliberate than writing for yourself? Writing about anything, fusing your past and present into an irreversible and irreplaceable moment in time. Moment of I putting these words on some variation of paper. Thank you for watching, and if you don't want to write for yourself, you can always write something for me in the comments and potentially like the video if you enjoyed it, and thank you for your time.